Welcome to another episode of the Following Films podcast. In today's installment, we dive headfirst into the realm of true crime as we unravel the mysteries surrounding the intriguing docu-series, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. I'm your host, Chris Maynard, and I couldn't be more excited to be joined by our special guest today, legal expert Beth Karas. Beth has an extensive background in covering high-profile trials and has become a trusted voice in the true crime community. The Curious Case of Natalia Grace is a thought-provoking and controversial docu-series that delves into the puzzling story of a young girl whose true identity and age have been called into question. In this episode, we take a look at the complex web of evidence, testimonies, and legal proceedings that surround Natalia Grace's case. Before we dive into our conversation, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Bookman's. Bookman's is not just a bookstore. It's a community of book lovers, collectors, and enthusiasts. With their extensive selection of new and used books, movies, music, and more, Bookman's is a treasure trove for anyone seeking intellectual adventures. We appreciate their support in bringing you this episode. If you'd like to support the Following Films podcast, one of the simplest ways you can do it is by following the show on Spotify. It really does help. If you'd like to become a financial supporter of the show, check out the show notes and click the Support Us link. The Curious Case of Natalia Grace is currently available on ID. Hope you enjoy the show. Thanks.
Watch this?
I did, of course. Yeah, we watched all 6 episodes over the weekend.
You did?
Yeah. It was something where me and my wife, we started the first episode, and it was just, okay, I'll just get enough to level set, see what's going on with this. And we couldn't put it down. This was just something that this story was so... I had no idea. And still, I have a lot of questions in leaving this. And that I love stories like this just because it causes you to question a lot of things that you make assumptions about. And just for people who aren't familiar with this case, could you possibly kind of level set a little bit and talk about what this case was and what were the legal questions that were at play?
Sure. So this is a story about a child who was adopted from Ukraine in 2008 by a family in New Hampshire when she was supposedly 4 years old. That family was trying to unload her pretty quickly, within a year or so, to other little families, little people, and because she was a child with dwarfism, plus a disability on top of that. Not that dwarfism is a disability, but she had a problem with her hips and her bone growth. So they could not find another home for her, and they gave her to an adoption agency in Florida. This is a New Hampshire couple. An Indiana couple adopted her in 2010. And it is the story of that family, the Barnett family, that adopted her in 2010, thinking they were adopting a 6-year-old girl, and soon came to believe that she was not the person they believed her to be. They had very limited information. But the whole saga that unfolds in the 6 hours, the 6 episodes, involves questions about her true identity, her true age, whether or not the Barnetts treated her properly, legally, fairly, because they ended up taking some pretty extraordinary steps and having her re-aged, having her age changed, not by a few years, which is what we will often see in international adoptions, but by more than a decade. So it is a story. Did they commit a crime? They were charged with crimes. Did they commit a crime in the way they treated her? Or were they truly terrorized by a person they believed was a child, who was masquerading as a child, but was truly a sociopathic adult who was out to harm them, maybe even kill them? The case goes in a lot of directions, and there are a lot of stories, and you just sometimes don't know who to believe and who, as I've said it more than once, who the true villain is here. Or is there more than one? I'm sorry, that's not very short.
No. There's no way of wrapping your head around the story. Even by the end of episode 2, you really start getting an idea of what's really at play here. That it takes a while for the story to reveal itself, because I don't think there's a way to really get your head around this complex story that quickly. There's so many different elements here.
And I learned it in pieces as well, right?
Okay.
Like I was brought in by the production company to help do some analysis, but I was not on the ground floor years ago, right? So they fed me parts of it too. So as I'm giving interviews in this series, sometimes I'm learning it at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm sort of going through what the viewer's going through, but I've had a little bit of a head start. But it's not like at the beginning I knew a whole lot. I didn't. And when I say my head was spinning, that I was flip-flopping, that is a completely honest statement, because I was sort of doing my own investigation, like the viewer is throughout the series.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that the viewers, sort of are, grab it. They're grabbed by the storyline quickly and then get invested and try to figure it out. Because frankly, I don't know where the truth is. And I do lean in one direction. I won't tell you which, but I do lean in one direction. But there are just too many variations to the stories for me to feel like we know the absolute truth.
I 100% agree with you. And the thing that happens because of the way that you were given this information, and that you didn't come to this project with this preconceived notion of this is exactly what happened, you become the de facto voice for the audience. That there's moments in this where you're actively pushing against and saying, okay, I don't trust this person that's talking one bit. And then you come in and say, okay, well, I don't trust this either. Have you thought about these things? And it's almost like you're having a conversation with the audience about the facts that we're seeing. And are these facts, are these misleading? And as we dole out this information, we're all kind of arriving. I think that there's some room for interpretation in the end of this, but I would be really hard pressed to see somebody who, given the facts as I've seen them, and I haven't dug into this beyond watching this documentary because I didn't want to spoil, seems like the wrong word, but I wanted to take this journey with this particular docu-series. I didn't want to end up leaning ahead of it. I just wanted to know where it was giving this information. I want to find out more now at this point, but if that makes sense. So it's something that I think that there is some ambiguity in the end. That last episode, I could see people having two very different reads on it.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that your assessment is what it is, because I think that's what we were hoping that the series would do, is that my voice would simply be a voice. I'd be raising issues that the viewers may be raising. So, and you said in the first few hours, we've achieved that, which is good. And I appreciate that. There's nothing magical about, being a lawyer here. I'm a legal analyst. Law school just gives you the tools. But so I think a certain way, analytical, but the viewers are like the 13th juror in a trial, right? And so, you're the fact finders, and I was looking for the facts as well, as an investigator. So, I'm glad we're on this journey together. It's a journey that will continue. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers because, people who are listening to this may not have seen this series or all of it yet, but because of certain things that ended, like there was a certain milestone in the journey recently, maybe more information will be available. We'll see. Because right now, up until then, I don't know that you could have found more information than what's in this documentary out there in the public domain.
And that's something that I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that there does need to be a addendum. At some point in time, there could be a 7th chapter of the story at some point, because this is clearly not the end of it. It's still something that I highly recommend watching, because it's not something that you feel dissatisfied that you were let off the hook, but it is something that I think that it has a conclusion that for me personally, I was satisfied with, where I felt like, okay, I have a definite opinion of this, but there's this one very clear thread that, again, don't want to give anything away, but that is open in the end of this that I think will need to be closed eventually.
What I love about this series is that it doesn't just feed you the information and tell you what the end result is. No. Right? It's great because it's very thought-provoking. And so it kind of breaks the formula for a lot of shows that have a beginning, middle, and end. And here, you hear as much as we know, and things are, to a certain extent, things are inconclusive on some points. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know how old Natalia is.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about what re-aging normally looks like, the legal process behind that? Because it feels like this may have been a little bit out of step with what that normal process looks like. Was this typical?
So that's a good question. This is not in my experience as an attorney to do this re-aging, but what I know about general procedures is that a hearing is held, meaning it's not just argument from the lawyers, but testimony is actually taken.
Sure.
And in this case, a judge granted an emergency petition based on an affidavit by a doctor and did not actually take testimony and hear from Natalia, for example. And this was in 2013 when she was re-aged. I'm sorry, 2012 when she was re-aged. And that was atypical. Okay?
Yeah.
Because with the stroke of a pen, she had a new age. She had a new birth date. Typically is more of a full-blown hearing. And that actually did happen years later here. I mean, a different judge years later did hear testimony and came up with the same result.
And the formula that was used here, and because there was there was precedent that this age was established by the court, that this is a legal document now that exists that says this is the age of this child. There's a birth certificate now, or whatever that is. At that point in time, when there becomes questions about child abandonment, anything like that, you have to go back, I'm assuming from a legal point of view, to that document. And whether that's right or wrong, you have to look back to that point in time, or you have to separately relitigate that re-aging. Is that something that's even possible?
So sure, it's possible, and that's what the prosecution wanted to do, but the judge wouldn't allow it.
Okay.
He's like, nope, I'm not going to second guess another judge. This is what it is. And thankfully, from a prosecutor's point of view, they had two sets of charges, which were mirror images based on different theories. One theory was that she was neglected and abandoned as a child. The other theory was that she was neglected and abandoned as a dependent person. That age wasn't relevant. As a dependent person, she had a disability. You know, a dependent person can be elderly, can be disabled, doesn't have to be a child, but dependent is a child also. So there's different theories here. So all the child neglect charges had to get dismissed. And if there were only child neglect charges, say she didn't have a disability,
right,
then the judge, I suspect the judge would have just dismissed the charges and there never would have been a trial.
Wow. Then can we talk a little bit about the responsibility of parents? Because one of these questions that was raised during this is, when you have an adoptive child, when you adopt a kid, the parent responsibility at that point, that if you do end up adopting a child that is being seen as a sociopath, that there are these reports that are coming along that this is a dangerous child, is it common for that to be pushed back? What recourse would parents normally have to handle that situation? Well,
you know, parents can go back to, and have attempted to give children back.
Okay.
To the adoption agency. I mean, it became an international spectacle when a Russian child was returned to Russia some years ago. So that didn't go over well. But this was a closed adoption, and there was very limited information available to them, and they couldn't even find out the name of the prior family that had her. But they did find out from that luggage tag, as you learn in the first episode or two. But really, they have to do what any parent would do. I mean, they're like the biological parent. They're the parents of this child. You know, get her help.
Yeah.
Get her help. I mean, they've adopted her. They have assumed the role of the parent, and to terminate the adoption would be very difficult. So, I mean, and they did, though. They did try to get her therapy and had her institutionalized. They were taking steps.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, were they being completely, honest with the authorities, with the doctors, the therapists? Was Natalia really doing and saying these things? Was she being forced to do these things? Did she know better? Was she a child? Is she acting out because the early years of her life she had been abused and she didn't know her boundaries? I mean, I do think they took the steps that parents would normally take for their own children. I mean, they did a great job with Jacob, who was, on the spectrum, but not a behavioral problem.
Today's episode of the Following Films podcast is brought to you by Bookman's. I'm joined today by my son, Jacob. Jacob, say hello to people. Oh, there you go. You're already on it. So, Jacob, when you go to Bookman's, what is it that you like to look at? What do you like to get?
To get toys, and movies, and the coffee news.
You like to look at the movies, and you like to get the coffee news, the newspaper they have out front? That's great. So last time we went into Bookman's, I picked up a movie. What movie did I get, Jacob?
Escape from New York. same as it hurts of the as the cover. Sorry.
So, no, you're okay. Would you talk a little bit about what you see on the cover of Escape from New York on this Blu-ray that I got?
So, based on this cover, you see glass shattered, and also the Statue of Liberty's face fell apart. Because in this movie, Escape from New York, the introduction is a man trying to save the president's daughter, and New York turns into a prison in this movie, and there's the hero, as you can see, very strong, in fact.
Oh, yeah. Now, this is one of my favorite movies. I love this movie. Now, you're too young to watch it because you're only 6 years old, but do you think in a couple of years from now, when you get a little bit older, you'll want to check out Escape from New York?
Yes!
Okay. What's a movie that you've seen that we picked up at Bookman's that you like? Come here, talk so that people can hear you.
Little Shop of Horrors?
Little Shop of Horrors. That's a great movie. So when you're going to Bookman's, you can get movies, DVDs, Blu-rays, 4K, Laserdisc, VHS. You can also get comic books, newspapers, magazines, home furnishings. You can get tons of stuff there. Because remember, Bookman's has your cool covered. Hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Yay, that was a good idea.
Well, that's, I have a 7-year-old that reminded, oddly enough, that his name is Jacob as well. And he's on the spectrum. And there was a lot there where that kid just was the entry point for me from that family to this story, was the one voice that I always believed. It was the one person in this that's not from the outside that I felt like there was the one person I can trust. There's my anchor into what actually happened here. And that never wavered throughout this process, that I felt like, at least from what I was shown, that this was the one person that I didn't think that they were trying to manipulate me at any given time.
Despite the hot mic incident?
Sure.
I don't want to spoil it. Okay.
Yeah. Even in that moment, what I'm thinking is that there's information that he doesn't know that he wants to get it to go into, but there is a level of protection, but I feel like he's not misdirecting. It's just not the complete story. And those are lying by omission when it comes to protecting your parents. I don't know that necessarily. Is it in a court? No, that's a different case. But when you're just telling me your story and there's things you want to leave out to protect people that you love, I get that. That's something that I never, even with that, I never really felt that he was heading down the wrong path with that. Yeah,
I agree with you there. It's a story full of so many interesting people, though, right? Like you just, you
that's
can't
an
take your eyes off
understatement.
it.
Yeah. Even when you as an audience member are actively just enraged or angered by the people because there's times where getting incredibly frustrated by this story that you're being told. It's always compelling. I'm always moved forward. It's not something that I am rejecting the story because of the people that's telling it. I have a lot of doubt in what I'm being told at different times, but I'm always compelled to go forward with it.
Right. Yeah, the production company had amazing access to people, and over years. This was a long-term project. I jumped in sort of toward the end when Michael had already done 2 very long interviews in 2019 and 2022. It's like, or maybe he was just giving that second interview, but it's like, what? Anyway, it's a journey.
What are the? Do you think that this will make changes going forward? Has there been precedent set here that was bad precedent that we need to reevaluate in cases like this going forward?
Well, I think that this may open up some people's eyes to international adoptions and closed adoptions, and maybe in particular this facility in Hollywood, Florida. So I suspect that there could be some fallout because of that. Let's hope, because that's, we all want to do journalism that is impactful, and that is, part of making a change for the better for people. So, only time will tell. But I think there's a good chance that at least people's awareness will be raised, and, people talk about it, and maybe it'll make some change.
No. Yeah. And at the very least, there's certain documentaries that I've seen that have absolutely changed my opinions on things. And this is one that has at least had the conversations that me and my wife were having afterwards about the idea of closed adoption and the parental rights. And when it becomes, we have 2 kids and, those things, should we ever think about fostering a child or something along those lines, what does that look like? And what are the responsibilities that we would own at that point? And what can we do? And having that kind of context and the full picture before you make that seems like something that if you're going to bring in this outside person into your house, you need to have a fuller picture than 24 hours. You have to make it. That's like a used car salesman tactic. It's not something that seems like it should be the way you treat a human, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And Michael does say that when they got there, jumping on that airplane from Indiana, he was a little surprised at the facility and had said to his wife, check that address again, because this doesn't look like a place where we're going to get a child. A little one-story building in a rundown strip mall. It's like, there were red flags already, but they pushed forward. They seemed to be committed. They had wanted that child in Haiti, but the earthquake had occurred some months earlier. So, they felt this was, the answer to their prayers.
Yeah. And it's just when I guess that the thought beyond that, until the legal system catches up with this, when you have these moments of being as thoughtful as possible with this, that you're opening up your kids to something, that you have to be more careful with that. And I can see how when it's taken away from you, that next decision, when that comes along, you can be impulsive in that moment and make a decision. And I definitely have my opinion about where the story kind of goes off the rails. And I feel like that first couple days, that first week of this story feels like everybody's kind of aligned with it. And there's a moment where the age comes into question. It feels like that's sort of the fulcrum. That's the point where where the question of what actually happened really comes into place here. And that's where my kind of like where I deviate from the story that's being told. If that
Wait, are you saying for you it was in those first few weeks or the first few months?
Even the first, because it's within the first few weeks that they discover there's a possibility that the age could be off here. Right. And then the reaction to, okay, what's the full story, creates a set of behaviors that we're never really given an insight to. We just have a question about what could have really been happening. We find this out much later. But I think that you either go along with a version that we're being told for a couple episodes, or you start to question that. And the more that you question it, the more that the story makes sense to me personally, that there's too many holes otherwise, that it just doesn't, I can't get my head around it, how the rest of this fits in.
So it's so interesting. Have you ever been a juror? Because you sound like a juror. Like this is what you do, right? When I haven't been a juror, but I've been a trial lawyer. And you get the facts, right? Now you haven't seen everything like tested through direct and cross examination, but kind of a little bit. I mean, I try to bring that kind of stuff up. And so you're trying to figure out the facts. I mean, like a juror. That's why I say, I'm not kidding when I say you're like the bureau, like the 13th juror. Like, what is the truth here? And
that's the fascinating thing about the story. And I appreciate any narrative that gives me more questions than answers, that I walk away from it. That's a sign of something that's been well made, something that has deeper implications to it. And I think this is a really fascinating story that actually will inspire conversations, and it'll have people doing more research and wanting a little bit more from the story and thinking about the broader implications of it. So I think this is to me, that's the fine line between exploitation and something that's actually journalism. And I think that this is wholly in the side of journalism, where there's a lot of things that fall under true crime that I think that there's not really anything other than the scandalous story there, that this has by far, to me personally, more depth than that.
Right. Very insightful. And what I love about the law is that, well, I love a lot of things about the law, but that there are a lot of gray areas, and things aren't always just sort of black and white, right? And so what happens in a courtroom is often because of the advocacy of the attorney on one side or the other, like how convincing they are to a jury. But here, nothing is straight up. I mean, I don't know. I question the veracity or accuracy of the documents from Ukraine,
of course.
Of its history of, corruption in the government and stuff. And this is, pre the war, of course. I don't know. I'm fascinated. I've watched the whole thing like you in advance, and I was riveted last night for the first 2 episodes. I'm going to watch it every night because I can't get enough of it. Because I read about all these characters and then seeing them on screen. I wasn't seeing them until I saw the screeners like you, just before it aired. And it's fascinating because I think when people say she was a child, she was an adult, based on my observations, my interaction, they believe what they're saying, and I believe them.
Yeah.
One of them's wrong, though.
But there's that weird possibility that they're both sort of right, where there's this in-between area, that gray area where this story actually exists, because I have my absolute opinion on this. But then there's a couple of questions that I still have that don't make sense with what I think happened, that you can't, there's certain elements around the accent that don't make sense. But then something that wasn't really that didn't go into too much, knowing, being a dad, seeing handwriting, it's just, you see where that's developed, and you can see, okay, is this something that is somebody who's just learning this, or is this somebody that's it's all these little things that don't add up.
But not knowing the Ukrainian language or having an accent it's a little bit of a red herring, I think, because children pick up language very quickly. Sure. And when a child is immersed, he or she can learn a foreign language without an accent and speak like a native speaker. And I think Natalia, she came to the United States at 4, if the birth records are accurate, if she was a child when the Cicconi's in New Hampshire adopted her, she wouldn't have an accent now. And she might have even lost her native tongue. So the Barnetts are really smart people. And I was really surprised when they were talking about that. I don't know how much of it, I don't remember how much of that made it into the show, but Michael did talk about she didn't have an accent. She was a child.
Well, no. I was born in Georgia. And you can pick up how much of my Georgia accent, that there's videotape of me that I had when I was a kid. I moved to New Jersey and I lost my accent within a year. It was gone. But there were things that you could pick up every once in a while that would be there, even for a little while. That it's just, that is one of those things that, because if we're looking at the difference between, I think the timeline would be 4 and 6 is where that would be. Was it 2 years? Would there be any remnants there or not? Because that's literally half her life at that point in time. Right. I don't know. I don't know, but there's having the original language. No, of course not. I think that's gone. Any memory of it? No, because if you have kids, you've talked to them about those memories when they're at that age, and you say, so what do you remember of this thing that happened that was pretty big that we all did when you were 2.5 years old? They're not establishing those memories yet. So it doesn't exist.
We have scenes in our minds of our childhoods, right? Just scenes. We can't recount years and months even. And
I personally feel like a lot of those scenes are sometimes, they feel like memories, but they're stories that people have told me. Memory is a weird thing. That's one of the most unreliable pieces of data you can lean on, because you tell a story enough times and that's the reality. And when you recount a story multiple times, I don't think you're actually remembering the moment that something happened. You're remembering the story that you've told. It's the rehearsed script that you have.
That's why having contemporaneous notes and journals, diary entries is like manna from heaven for a trial attorney who needs to put a witness on the stand to say something, because memories are faulty or implanted or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that's what we always look for, contemporaneous notes. You've got journal entries? Great. We know what was happening at that time.
Well, it's that thing where you tell a story about, if you talk to somebody that's been through something, be it a nasty breakup, a divorce, or they lost their job or something like that, and you talk to them about it the day that it happened, it's probably the most honest version of it you're going to get. When we tell that story 5, 10, 15 years from now, you get your reflections on it, your thoughts about it, how you've sort of summed all of that up, and you have a much different version of the facts. Like I was in a fire where I was hospitalized for 2 months. My version of that story is wildly different now than it was the day that it happened. So it's one of those things that it's just, I think we have to be aware of when we think about stories like this, and when we think of our own stories.
And when we read memoirs.
Yeah, of course. Right? Well, thank you so much, Beth, for taking the time to do this today.
Pleasure.
I appreciate it. And thank you for your role in the film, in the series, because this was something that while me and my wife were watching this, we're like, okay, thank God, because the voice of reason is coming up again, that we would have at least when there's moments where you spend a lot of time in these sort of these areas where there's pretty long interviews where you're just, we needed a voice of reason, and you provide that for the audience. So thank you for that.
Thank you. If you ever want to talk off air, to share your thoughts. I'll be happy to gab when we're not recording. Okay.
Absolutely. 100%. I'm going to go ahead and end it there.
Time enough to figure you out. Time enough to write this down. Wish me luck, give me hope. So I fall one more time, and I'll say I can't save you. Fell down into the bathroom, fade out into the background. Get up and go down again. So what? I know you'll give up. Why can't you prove me wrong? There's just too much time. Why can't you prove me wrong? No way to make you mine. Why can't you prove me wrong? Nothing for each other. You'll be fine. Once more waking up face down. Two lives never to connect. You can't really feel. Blocked out, shut up. So I fall one more time, and I'll say I can't save you. Why can't you prove me wrong? There's just too much time. Why can't you prove me wrong? No way to make you mine. Why can't you prove me wrong? Nothing for each other. You'll be fine. Save you now. Save you. Save you now. Save you. Save you now. Save you. My voice cracked.